Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is John Paul Vicari. I also go by JP. My pronouns are he, him. I'm the managing director here at We Create Space. I'm joining you today from Michigan in the US. For anyone who may need a visual description, quickly, I have brown skin, a black beard, black curly hair, and I'm currently seated wearing a black polo. Very excited to have you all here today to discuss a wonderful book, Pride and Prejudices, Queer Lives in the Law, with our wonderful author, Keio Yoshida. Side note, Keio will do their own introduction shortly. However, they were an award winner from We Create Space Queer Leader Awards last year. And as we approach our award ceremony this coming weekend, the timing of this could not be more perfect. It's almost like we planned it, which we did. So welcome. We're so happy to have you here. We are going to have quite the conversation today. Before we get too much further, just so you know what to expect for today, we've got a cute little poll coming up in just a second. Keo will give a brief overview of the book before we have our little conversation. You'll have plenty of time for your own Q and A's with Keo later. We'll do some key takeaways as well as a closing. So, with that, folks who may be new, and this might be your first book club with us, our book club is part of our Unlock venture. Unlock is our queer leadership network, which is powered directly by We Create Space. It is really all about providing a community-led platform and network supporting queer leaders in business and in life. We imagine a future and a world where all queer leaders are seen and celebrated. It's part of why we have our Queer Leadership Awards, which expanded globally this year. And spaces like this are really meant to help connect folks, whether you're, thinking about becoming a leader in managing people, right, and going through a more traditional career path in leadership, in a professional setting, maybe you're an entrepreneur. We've got experts across all lines of professional work within our network, and so happy to have you here as part of that. We do everything from workshops and retreats to networking and providing resources, including book clubs like this. And so if you have more questions or want to get involved with Unlock, follow us online, and get in touch. As we get settled into our conversation for today, let's all agree on a few basic principles. So we're here today to hear from the lived experience of our author. We want everyone to be open and respectful. We encourage you to ask questions and be curious, but just make sure that that's centered in kindness. There might be things that come up today that you find challenging or triggering. That's okay. We are recording this. You can always step away and come back to the recording later, but just make sure to take care of yourself during today's session. With that, let's have you share some of your own thoughts. So we're really curious to find out two things from you. And you can submit your answers one of two ways. You can pull out your phone and scan the QR code on your screen. Uh, my wonderful colleague Neil will also be posting the link directly for this poll in the chat, so you're welcome to click the link. But we want to hear two different things from you. So, A, just what brings you here today? Curious to find out what drew you into this particular book club. There are a few options that you'll see once you scan or click. And the second question relates really heavily to this book. So, if there was one law in your country that you could change, what would it be? And if you want to tell us what country you're in, that would also be really helpful. Um, if it were me, I right now would change the abortion laws in the US and reinstate Roe v. Wade. That's a very important one here that affects everyone. And so that would be my pick, but we will share your results in just a second. So again, if you can scan or click. and we've got some initial results coming in. So, what brings you here today? Um, yeah, you want to know more about the state of LGBTQ plus rights. Love that there are some book club regulars here. Yeah, also big fans of Keio. If I had answered this question, I would have selected all. There are no right or wrong answers here, but just so you know what my answer would have been, that would have been it. And if there was one law you could change in your country, what would it be? The UK, new stupid laws around protesting and facing arrest. Yeah, screw that. In Syria, for queerness to be illegal, absolutely, that would be a good one to change. More legal support to queer minors. Yes, there was a Supreme Court ruling today in the US that upheld a discriminatory law preventing uh, minors from receiving gender affirming care in one of the states here, have major acceptance of LGBTQ plus IA rights. Trans women are women, 100%. Trans men are men. So thank you. Really appreciate that. And sorry, it seems like maybe there was a small mix-up, but glad folks who were on a Google Meet link have joined the meeting. So, with all of that said, Kyo, welcome. So happy to be in conversation with you. Would love for you to do an introduction to yourself, who you are. If you can provide a visual description, that would be appreciated. And then just start by telling us about the book and its origin, and then you and I will chat.
Great, thanks, JP, and hello everyone. It's nice to virtually meet you. This is the first time I'm doing an online book event, which is very exciting. So I'll start with a visual. I'm wearing glasses. I'm wearing a white shirt. I have short brown hair. I recently got a haircut. And I am half Asian looking. So that's my visual. I'm also holding up a copy of the book, or you'll also be seeing the book on the screen, and it is red, and it's got a pink triangle on it as well, which has a symbolic symbol for queer people. I want to just share, I guess, a few things about this book, why I wrote it. I'm a barrister, I'm a lawyer in the UK and the Republic of Ireland. And so I work with the law. The law is my tool. It's a tool that can be used to protect rights, but it's also a tool of oppression. And we've been seeing that in different countries around the world. And I am really passionate about making sure that people understand their rights. People know the laws that they have, that exist, and the laws that need to change. So for us to be able to live our authentic queer lives. I also wanted to write a story. I'm from a place, my accent, I don't know, it may or may not be familiar to you, is from a place called Northern Ireland or the north of Ireland. And it has fascinated me that most of the significant cases on LGBTQ rights that we've seen come before the Supreme Court in UK have all originated from Northern Ireland, where I'm from. And that includes cases like Dudgeon, which was a case in the 1970s, late 70s, which led to the decriminalization of what was then called homosexuality in the early 1980s. So it was still a criminal offense in, a part of the United Kingdom to be gay until 1980s. And then I was just talking to, different people where my partner's from Texas, and it was a criminal offense there until 2003. So I wanted to write a book showing, well, this is how far we've come in this really short space of time in some countries. In other countries, I talk about in the book how it's still a criminal offense in many countries, how there's been this push for legal recognition in the law in terms of family rights and marriage and death and taxes, um, but also really that there's a long way to go. And I've been concerned, you know, when I started to write this book about the backlash we've been seeing in LGBTQ rights, especially on trans rights. And very sadly, since this book has, you know, be finished, since I finished writing the book, there's been a lot worse news for trans people across the world. So that's the book. I want to argue that we need better laws.
That's a pretty great message. Can't can't be too upset about that. I read this book over the course of like maybe 2 days. I honestly just like was so fascinated by it. And we were just talking briefly, but for folks who maybe have not picked it up yet, it's you telling your own story in like a memoir sort of framework, but you're also weaving in so many different stories about laws, like you just mentioned. I guess I'm curious, like, what was the motivation to present your story through that lens?
I think one of the motivating factors was that I had a child some years ago, and before I started writing the book, and so many people started reaching out to me to ask how I did it. How did you have a child? What were the laws? Which country did you go to? Um, all these different things. And it was something that I felt that I've navigated at different points in my life where I think in a lot of countries, people just take it for granted. You are heterosexual, you get married, it's easy, you just go, you get married, you have a child. It's also usually easy unless there are fertility complications. But even in those cases where there are fertility complications, usually the law is set up for you. Well, with queer people, we're constantly, I felt that my life was constantly interacting with the law and I was having to navigate it. And as a lawyer, I had the cultural capital or the knowledge to be able to do that. But for a lot of people, it's not easy to get that information in a way that's readily accessible. And so that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to talk about marriage laws. I wanted to talk about fertility laws. I wanted to, talk about transitioning and legal recognition, all things that I've had to deal with in my life. And I hope it's written in a way that isn't just legalese. So I try to write it as a sort of memoir to make it more accessible.
I think you nailed it. Honestly, like it was so easy as someone who is not in the legal sector to follow and read and really understand the implications of these cases. So thank you for that. Again, can't recommend it enough for everyone on this call to read because it's a really amazing mix of learning your own history, learning like really important things about like our history as queer people, but also like very motivating to get more involved in in the legal space because there's so much I think as queer people we avoid because it is really complex and we kind of feel like we don't belong in those spaces. But yeah, it's a massive rallying call for queer people and my interpretation of it.
Thank you so much, JP. One of the things I really wanted to do, I set out and I was like, I want to write a book on like the history and present of LGBTQ rights in 50,000 words. I really set that as a goal at the very beginning because even though I was reading, these judgments, which are hundreds of pages long, and I listened to I think you just referenced Scrimetti earlier that was decided today. You like listen to those court hearings, you're there for days listening to those, and then you're reading the judgments, and there's all this background work that goes into it. But in the end, those cases have a core message. And that's what I really wanted to distill down to this book as to what these Supreme Court cases have been saying around the world and how some of them are really beautiful. The Supreme Court of India's jurisprudence it's really touching. It talks about how decriminalization leaves us as a skeleton, or how criminalization leaves us as a skeleton sans esprit. And then you get these decisions not so long ago from the US Supreme Court, which are talking about nearly this love and a right to love, to other more recent cases, which really focus and narrow in on legal technicalities. And my view on that is that that happens when there's a lack of appreciation of authentic queer lives and how the law should be there to protect and celebrate them.
Yeah, and I think I mean I admire so many things, and like I have so many questions I want to ask you, so I'm going to do my best to get through as many as possible. But what I found really compelling, and it reminded me of what Audre Lorde said, right? Like no one lives a single issue life. That like your discussion and framework around these cases and how it affects other rights of other marginalized groups, right? Like that's the whole concept of intersectionality. And like there's so much of that that comes across in the book. And so I guess I'm curious from your own lived experience and professional experience, especially in like the legal space, which is more often than not like male dominated, like what did you maybe learn or unlearn around your own experience with the patriarchy and misogyny when writing the book? Because those come up quite a bit as themes in the book.
That's right. One of the things I really wanted to do is to write a book that tried to look at everybody in the rainbow, LGBTQ plus, AI plus, because a lot of times I've picked up books on queer rights and the dominant narrative or focus has been on gay men. And in one way, there's a good reason for that. The policing and surveillance of gay men through, homosexuality laws or buggery, sodomy laws. And this is a, language caveat. This is the language on the statute books and which still exist in many countries today, focused on gay men's lives. So I think that's why you see that. Those books I feel have been written, and I wanted to write a different book. I wanted to write a book that showed how it's all these intersecting frameworks that exist that continue to punish queer people for trying to just live our lives, simply sing, dance, skip about, kiss who you want to kiss, and live your life. And I think my professional life, I talk about one of the cases I talk about is Rosanna Flammer Caldera and Sri Lanka. And that's a case that I worked on as part of a legal team. Rosanna is just this incredible, amazing advocate from Sri Lanka, and she challenged the criminalization of same-sex intimacy between women. And that was the first case ever which was brought to the UN which looked at queer women's experiences of criminalization. All the other cases focused on gay men and their experiences. And I think what we wanted to do is to bring that case, it was Human Dignity Trust also was involved and other people. To show, well, when many countries criminalize queer women, but the impact of misogyny and patriarchy and these laws on homosexuality have a particular way of impacting women. And this can be because it leaves them more open to gender-based violence from could be family members, could be community, could be from the police, and it impacts women and queer people in all different ways. So that I think it was a running theme throughout the book because I wanted to show, how it impacts on different people's lives.
Yeah, and as a cisgender male presenting person, I think it's really necessary and topical today for other cis, like queer gay men to read this because I think we in that sort of category have taken for granted how much work all of the other marginalized groups that exist within the queer community have done for like queer cis gay men, right? Like we owe that back to the community at a scale that we may never be able to repair, right? And like contribute back. However, like women need our support, trans people need our support. Like there are fundamental groups that exist in the LGBTQ plus community who need allyship from cis gay or queer men like myself. And again, I find the book very compelling to make that happen, but there's often a disconnect there. I guess I feel like cis gay men, especially, like could and should be doing more. So I guess what advice maybe do you have for cis queer men to get involved?
I mean, I think that I think everybody should do their part, you know? And I think at this, especially at this juncture in history, one of the reasons I really wanted to write this book is that I think if you're situated in a certain part of the world, and it's a very small part of the world, you might feel like you have all the rights that you need or that you want. So say in the US, for example, where you've had cases like gay marriage, and then you've had cases where homosexuality has been decriminalized. You might feel, okay, well, now the gays have made it. But I think that's not the case. We're seeing book bans in certain states. There's, real questions now about gay people being able to access services. Where's the line between someone baking a cake with Bert and Ernie or and with a gay marriage message? The book talks about all these different kinds of situations. So I think there's a real danger of complacency. And I think that's where it is a call to action where everybody, cis, uh, trans, genderqueer, non-binary can get involved. And I think it's particularly important that we support people who are intersex as well, because one of the things I talk about in the book is just how the standards and human rights in relation to that need to develop so much.
Yeah, could not agree more with that comment as well. And you know, again, I find the simplicity of how you write about fundamental human rights so nourishing because it really is that simple. Like everyone is just deserving of like an equal amount of dignity and like especially under the law, but beyond the law. So I'm curious, based off of the cases you put in the book, or maybe if there were any that didn't make it in, like has there been one in particular that has really changed your understanding or like sat with you about how you view fundamental human rights?
Yes, for me, there's a case called Norris in Ireland, and it was a case I remember going to law school, and I was 18 years old, and I was really excited to be there. I'm, a total nerd, and I'm reading these cases, and I knew I was queer. I just tried to, coming out and fallen in love, and I had this girlfriend, and then I'm reading this case from the Irish Supreme Court, which basically upholds the criminalization of homosexuality. And it was a case decided in the 1980s, and homosexuality was decriminalized in Ireland in the early 90s. So really recent history. And I remember just reading this really celebrated judge's judgment decision. Um, I'm thinking this is absolutely absurd, He's talking about the need to preserve the common good and how if you legalize homosexuality, then mildly homosexual people will start becoming more homosexual. And you're thinking like, what is this? It's kind of like this everybody is spaghetti till they're wet argument, which then he takes to say, and this is why we need to ban something. And it is just for me, he doesn't cite any other legal decisions. He decides it on the basis of his own prejudice. And it was a real wake-up call for me because I thought I was coming to the law to learn how the law was going to change everything and make everything better. But it was actually a case that taught me actually there are decisions which can be bad for us as well. And we need to learn what those arguments are so that we can conjure them. So the law is something that can be used, both ways, protection and oppression.
Yeah, and I want to maybe dig a little bit deeper on this because it was really around the time where you were first starting university, where you, I think, in the book start speaking about the importance of queer community and like sort of your own hope of finding that once you went to university. And spoiler alert, like not finding it immediately. And so I'm wondering if you can share a little bit more about like your own experience in finding queer community, the importance of that, but secondary, like how can people use legal framework to like uh, support, control, and maintain queer communities?
Those are two big questions. I was I was one of those people who I went to Dublin, and I thought I would find this thriving queer community, and I found myself being one of the only people who was out at the time, and it felt like a really lonely place. And I kind of tell that story in the book. Later on, for this book, I did some interviews with people, and I interviewed someone who was in my year at university, and she didn't come out then either. And we talked about, she talked about how with the gay marriage referendum in Ireland, Ireland came out of the closet. And so that's so recent, like we're talking kind of like 2015, where people finally were able to really come out in a country like Ireland. But I found my queer community definitely in London when I moved. There was just so many gay bars. But also different spaces, like football clubs. Still today, I'm currently a member of like an inclusive tennis league, which it just gives me life. These spaces are so important, and they're real spaces of connection. And I think, there's many countries in the world where it has been illegal to have more than two gay people openly in a room, or where queer associations are banned, or even recently in the UK, where they've tried to talk about exclusion of trans people from lesbian or gay spaces. So I think it's really important that we stand up for community and inclusive community. Um, I don't know if that kind of, and uh, the legal answer to that is that there is a right of association that should be based on non-discrimination, and there's also a right to participation in terms of civil society activism. So, yeah, there's a whole thread on that about the importance of queer community, and I love my queers. They're my family.
Same, and I would venture to guess a lot of people on this call feel the same. And I'm very vocal about like anytime queer people get together, like that is an act of revolution and an act of pride. Like pride does not have to be us, like in a parade in hoochie shorts and no shirt. And like if that's what you want to do, great, fully support that. But spaces like this, I think, are also really important for us to like have that sense of pride and facilitate acts of liberation and revolution in like community, and not just like in like big events. Like these smaller events, I think are just as important. Anyways, that's a whole other conversation.
Just queer connections, and I bring this up because I was just in LA, and I was in the Abbey on Sunday. I'd never been, I heard about the Abbey, which is this kind of um mythical gay bar, I think, that you read about in stories and certain histories. And I walk in, and everybody else is these like LA queers, and I immediately meet somebody I know. And it was somebody from, 15 years ago that I kind of lived with in Madrid, a Spanish friend, and we both kind of screamed and hugged each other. And I feel like those encounters still happen to me because it is still a community space, whether they can be used for other things as well, like maybe meeting someone. It's by the by. I think there's still places for connection.
I love that. That's so cool. The world really is such a small place.
Mhm.
So, as we're going through more of the book, I guess I'm curious because I think for queer people especially, language is so important and constantly evolving. Um, how, I guess, in your experience, have you seen the law keep up with that, not keep up with that? Like, what can we do as, general citizens to help the law progress when it comes to language, right? Because it's typically in what I have read in your book and other places very gendered, um, doesn't necessarily give a lot of space for interpretation for anything outside the binary. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, I think, if you, the way the law works is, to take criminalization as an example, the language on the statute books, I think a lot of people now would just find extremely offensive, where it is a description of certain sex acts, or, even the word homosexuality. There's lots of people who do not want that term to be used in reference to them. There may be some people who do. There's a lot of people who find it offensive. If you look at other, even more recent pieces of, really quite recent pieces of legislation, they use terms like transsexual, and it's not something I would ever use for myself. So I think the law is always playing this catch-up game because it's always passed at a certain time. Um, and I think the what's also important on that is that I think sometimes that can be an excuse to continue to uphold and police queer lives in very particular ways. So I mean, I read somewhere, and I can't remember who said it, but we are really happy to adopt all these new terms in terms of computer technology, that just suddenly come into our language, and the law uses those, and AI and all the rest of it. But suddenly, when it comes to queer rights, we aren't so amenable to using inclusive terminology. And I thought that was really insightful and a good reminder for all of us, including lawyers, who I think we can get into a terrible habit of just simply having been disciplined into the status quo.
Yeah, that's actually a very fascinating topic to think about because AI laws are so abstract and constantly being edited and adapted. Um, I guess how much of that do you feel like, and again, sorry, this is very off topic, but now you've opened the door, so I'm curious, like the lobbying power of some of these like tech companies and like folks who want looser or less restrictive laws on AI versus the lobbying power of queer people.
You know, I'm going to not directly answer your question, but
That's fine.
I think what's really fascinating when I've been thinking about this tech AI kind of interface with queer rights is how people have been able to say, okay, I see you and I see all this tech movement. How can I use this to advance my rights? And one of the cases that I kind of mentioned, and the decision didn't come down until after I finished writing the book, is called Moose or Mouse, Mousse, and it's a case that went before the CJEU, which is a European court. And basically, a bunch of non-binary people in France took this case. There was about 60 of them against the national rail operator and said, you're taking my data and you're forcing me to say Mr. or Miss when I buy a train ticket, and that is inaccurate data collection. And so they used kind of data collection principles to challenge a lack of non-binary inclusion or even the collection of gendered data in the first place. So I think you're seeing queer people, non-binary people, young people say, okay, we'll take your tech principles and we're going to apply them so our rights are upheld too.
I think that directly answered the question in a beautiful way. So thank you. Appreciate that. I guess as you're thinking more about the future of the law specifically for queer rights, like what do you hope that future holds? What are you maybe most looking forward to?
I think, so my technical legal answer and where I start with in this book is that we have these international conventions and treaties for all these different people. So we have the, CEDAW, the Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. We have a convention on children's rights. We have a convention of rights of people with disabilities, migrant workers. I mean, I could just keep going on and on. But we don't have one in relation to sexual orientation and gender identity, which is binding on states. And I, there's a lot of people say, well, it's because there's going to be no consensus on it. It's because states won't agree, all the rest of it. But that's not a reason not to push for it. We should have an international treaty on queer rights, on authentic queer rights. So that's one thing I would really like to see. And I would also like to see, I think, kind of a real push on family rights. I think there's got to be a lot of movement. Some of this book really talks about the complexities of two queer people being recognized on a birth certificate, and or being able to have a family, being able to or trans people being scared to come out in case they lose their child in a custody battle. I mean, all of that is completely horrendous, and it happens to lesbians and gay men as well in a lot of countries around the world. So I think we really need to fight for that. It's not, marriage isn't the be all and end all. There's a whole other, for those who do want to have kind of more um yeah, rainbow families. I think there's a big push. So I'd like to see that.
Thank you. We are flying through time. Any questions from our audience? What do you want to know? You can submit them in the chat. You can use the Q&A box. If you um, want to come off mute, raise your hand and we can take you off mute. While we're waiting for some questions to come in, I'm curious, you were an award winner last year. We've got our award ceremony for 2025 winners this Saturday. What advice or wisdom would you want to share with award winners or just anyone about your experience being recognized for your contributions?
I would say if you can go and you're an award winner or you're invited, go, because I had such a great time last year. I mean, it was one of those events where I didn't know anybody in the room, but you came away really feeling that you made friends with everybody. And it was really beautiful. So it's a real community space. If you've any hesitation, I would just say just go. It was really great. And one of the things I really enjoyed about it was meeting people. I think I was the only lawyer that I met. Maybe there was one other person in the room. Nearly everybody did all different things. There was grassroots activists, there were people who were social media. I don't even know the term influence people. Like there was a real range of yeah, just queer people just being beautiful and having fun. So yeah, that's what I would say. I think it was great.
Awesome. I love that. Oh, Neil said it was so good to meet you there last year. Um, any questions for, oh, I think I just saw one pop in. So give me one second. Um, this person has said, I have my first book coming out early next year, which is a queer book, and I do feel nervous about it, especially as the publisher is based in the US. Identify as trans non-binary. My question is, how did you feel putting yourself out there as a queer writer when you first started on this journey? Love that.
Well, first off, huge congratulations on publishing your first book. It's a huge achievement. Enjoy every minute of it. It can be scary to put yourself out in public, but there are loads of ways to prepare. If you have never had media training, you can tell your publishers that, ask even a friend who studied journalism, or if you know any contacts to kind of help prepare you for tricky questions, have that deck prepared of questions, just so you feel prepared, and don't be scared at all about asking people for the questions in advance. Journalists mostly will have them prepared in advance. The other thing is, many times the person who is interviewing you, not like JP here, won't have read your book. And you're the expert of your book. Nobody else in the world knows more than you. So that should just give you the confidence of going out into the world with it and being proud of it. Um, this is my third book. I wrote the book before this was called How Many More Women in Australia and Silenced Women in the UK. And I wrote it with my colleague Jen Robinson, and it was about women, mostly women who speak up and make about their experiences or make allegations of abuse. And the media around that was really tricky. And I think having had the experience of doing that made me feel more confident being able to be out in the world. And to be honest, I think I'm also at an age where I am who I am. I'm out in the world. So the haters will hate all that kind of stuff. And you don't listen to it and you don't read it and you focus on the positive and the people who want to celebrate you and lift up your message. So yeah, well done.
Thank you for that. We have another question. Someone wants to know, how do you maintain your joy when you work in such a serious industry, and especially now when things feel pretty relentless?
That's such a good question, and it's a real struggle. Especially I feel like when I first started my job, my mentor at work, he told me he was like, it's really important that you manage yourself. And I didn't quite understand that, but I think it is just really really important to do things that give you joy and not to lose yourself in all the darkness. For me, that's playing tennis. I love playing tennis. And I've had, the most wonderful serendipitous connections by just bringing a tennis racket to another city, being connected to other trans or queer people just to play, complete strangers, and then you just, play together. So I think, for each person you will know what it is that gives you joy, and do that alongside, because I think when you work in human rights violations it can, there's no trigger warnings. Everything is a, in that category.
For
So
sure. Are you a tennis fan in general, like professional tennis?
yeah, I prefer playing it than watching it.
Sure.
uh, but I'm a general tennis fan.
I'm a massive tennis fan, so I feel like you and I might have to book another meeting just to talk about our favorite tennis players.
I would love that. Right now,
Fa-
this thing where like my daughter, she's 4, I'm like, you can't watch TV, but you can watch Sabalenka versus Coco Gauff.
100% anytime. Just maybe not the post-conference or post-match conferences. I love it. We have another question. What advice would you give to someone thinking of writing a book?
Um, I think that is, if you feel like you want to write it, you should write it. I also think that you need to just do it, because there's a point that comes when you're writing a book where you're like, this is terrible, no one's going to want to read it. You've just got to push through. So if you believe in the story you want to write and you feel like you want to write it, why not write it? I mean, it's just you and a page and a pen. Um, I find it a really cathartic and enjoyable experience.
I like it. Very simple. I agree. Just go write. There's a Hemingway quote that I'm gonna botch, but something to along the lines of like, writers don't sit down and write, they sit down and bleed on the page. And so I think there's a part of it where like you don't have to do it for any other reason other than it just brings you joy and that like you want to be doing it. You don't have to have a goal of like publishing or it even being, a certain style or format. Like just sit down and see what happens.
I think also, a lot of queer bookstores have queer writing clubs, that are great spaces to connect with people as well. And, it's kind of anecdotal, but I know that when I was writing my book, I got connected to another writer who's a trans man in Australia, who wrote a really, really beautiful book. And it was nice just to kind of make those connections and, talk to each other about writing as well. So I think it's a it could you can make it a solitary activity, or you can actually make it kind of a community activity as well.
I love that. Any other questions from the audience for Keo? If you don't have any other questions, maybe what's something that you've learned today, or heard today that you will put into action following this conversation, besides reading the book? Speaking of reading the book, Keo, do you have a place where you would want people to buy it from? Any recommendations of bookstores or websites for people to get it from that maybe aren't, supporting things we don't believe in as queer people. It's
So, the book is currently out I think it came out last week in the UK, and Ireland, and it came out yesterday in Australia. It's out in different dates in different jurisdictions or countries. I think it comes out later in the year in the US. If you are ordering it online, I think they deliver to everywhere. There is a beautiful little queer bookshop that I love in Edinburgh called Lighthouse Books. You can get it there. There's Gay's the Word in London, which I mention in the book. The Customs Authority in the UK in the 1980s tried to impound a whole load of books, which actually I have some of those books on my desk now because I started reading through the list of the books they tried to ban and censor, like Christopher Isherwood, Tennessee Williams, and I've been kind of making it my reading list. And some of the titles are, just great. I don't know if you noticed, JP, but there was one called like Men, How They Look, Taste, Smell, and Walk or something. I thought, oh, that's really great. So yeah, Lighthouse Book, Gay's the Word, just any independent, bookstores. I love the indies, Pages of Hackney. Yeah.
awesome. Um, we will put that list together and email it out to folks so they've got it. I'll include some US recommendations of like queer and female-owned independent bookstores to make sure to order from. Um, I know you've prepped some takeaways for the audience, so if you don't mind running through those, that would be great as folks are putting theirs in the chat.
Yeah, so I always like to give a real plug to people who are here now or maybe watching it later. If you're thinking about becoming a lawyer or going to law school and you're nervous about being queer, please don't be, we need people to work with the law and in the law and to queer it. And I think that's true of every profession and every ambit of life as well. I think the other thing to take away is that everybody can, be an advocate for LGBTQ plus rights. The law is not complex. Um, it sounds like it's complex, but actually it's really simple. We all have a right to dignity. We all have a right to life, and we all have a right to expression and to be ourselves. So I think that's a way we can really push and advocate in whatever sphere we're in. And yeah, the third one is I really want to ask people to stand up together as a community. There's a lot of division right now. And I just think it's more beautiful when we're together. And I also just want to say that you never know when you might become something else as well. So I think there's a strange division for me that's appeared or been created in the LGBTQ as if they're all separate things, while in fact some of us move through those, letters at different parts of our life. So
That's a very fascinating way to look at it. I love that. Thank you. That was really great framing. Um, we've got some comments coming in, people being very grateful for the advice and feeling uplifted and empowered. If you feel that way during this session, I can tell you that's only going to grow once you read the book. I really can't tell you enough how much I enjoyed reading it. As someone who's an avid reader, this one I blew through. So I loved it. If you can, we'd love to get your feedback from today's session. Feel free to scan this QR code. There's going to be a link in the chat as well that Neil has already shared. So please, please, please give us your feedback. We want spaces like this to continue and be very fruitful for everybody. So if you don't mind giving us some feedback, that would be great. Keio, I can't thank you enough. Honestly, this has just been so wonderful. Being able to highlight you and your work and everything that you do for our community is such an honor for us. So thank you. I'll give you a moment to say some final words to the audience as well.
I want to say thank you to you for reading it, for putting that work in, and to Neil as well behind the scenes, and to everyone in the We Create Space team who has worked to make this happen today. We, don't get to see everyone who does these things, but thank you. I want to also say to those of you who are going to the award ceremony, have a blast. Really enjoy it. It's going to be so fun. And to those of you, I don't know where you're based, but I'm going to be speaking at a lot of kind of book and pride festivals coming up in the UK mainly. And if you're there in person, please come and say hi. I always like meeting fellow queer travelers. So yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for being here. Can't thank you enough for your time and your engagement. Again, go get the book, read it, enjoy it, share it. Absolutely loved this. So thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. Kyo, I know you've had a really long day. So again, thank you so much. And I hope you get some much deserved rest for the rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we will talk very